It was a Thursday morning in Dallas, and the light was just creeping over the horizon, spilling gold across the manicured lawns of our suburban street. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling my third cup of coffee, staring blankly at the stack of bills I hadn't yet touched. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet for a place that usually hummed with the laughter of kids and the soft hum of Samantha's music drifting from her home office. Today, something felt off, a small ripple of unease that I couldn't quite shake. Samantha had left for work 15 minutes earlier, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she departed, giving me the perfunctory kiss on the cheek that morning. She looked flawless, of course, her hair perfectly styled, blouse crisp, and her smile radiant, hiding whatever storms were brewing beneath. But it was the phone she had left charging on the counter that caught my attention. I knew it was petty, I knew it was wrong to even glance, but the gnawing suspicion I'd been feeling all week pushed me past reason. I picked up her phone, my fingers trembling slightly, and unlocked it using the code I had memorized months ago when I thought we were fine. It started innocuously enough, text messages from her coworker, a man named Ethan Cole, someone I had met only a few times at neighborhood barbecues. The messages themselves were casual, at first. Lunch plans, jokes about traffic, harmless chit-chat, but then they shifted. Subtle at first, then unmistakably intimate. I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight. Wish I could hold you right now. My chest tightened, a physical ache that left me gasping. I had never expected this. I had never imagined that my marriage, the 16 years we had built together, the trust, the family, could be unraveling with a few swipes of a finger. I backed away from the counter, my heart pounding as if it were trying to escape my chest. I walked to the living room, trying to collect myself. I could hear the faint hum of the dishwasher, the soft whirring of the refrigerator, the occasional chirp of a bird outside, and yet all of it felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. I had to know more. I had to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. By mid-morning, I had made a decision. I called James Preston, a private investigator I had used once years ago when a business partner had tried to cheat me out of a deal. James was discreet, professional, and, most importantly, relentless. He agreed to take the case without hesitation, his voice calm, reassuring. "David, I'll get you the truth, no matter what it takes." I hung up and felt a small measure of relief. I wasn't alone in this. There was someone who could help me peel back the layers of deception and reveal what lay beneath. The next day, the first batch of photos arrived in my inbox. My hands shook as I opened them, each image worse than the last. Samantha, laughing, leaning against Ethan in the parking lot behind a trendy cafe downtown. Their arms wrapped around each other as if they had been married for years, as if the life we shared didn't exist. And then, the most damning evidence of all, a snapshot of a small, chubby-cheeked child, barely 2, clutched in Samantha's arms, Ethan's hand resting gently on the toddler's back. The resemblance was striking, undeniable. This wasn't just a flirtation. This was a secret life, one that had been growing quietly behind my back, hiding in plain sight. I spent that night pacing the house, replaying the images over and over in my mind. I could see the expression on Samantha's face, the sly smile, the way she looked at Ethan as though he was the only person in the room. I thought of our children, the trust we had built, the promises we had whispered in the dark, and all of it was a lie. My chest felt like it would burst, a mix of rage, sorrow, and disbelief. I tried to call her, to confront her, but my voice caught in my throat. I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. Over the next few days, James returned with more material. Video footage of Samantha and Ethan at a local park, the child playing in the sandbox as she kissed him on the cheek. I watched each clip with a cold, detached horror, noting every detail, the tilt of her head, the gentle laugh, the way Ethan's hand lingered on her lower back. And then it hit me. The child. I had a sinking feeling that had been gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. I asked James to do a discreet background check on Ethan, to find out everything about him, and the results confirmed my worst fears. DNA records, family connections, employment history, it all pointed to one thing. Samantha had brought a child into our lives that wasn't mine, and she had kept it hidden, weaving a story of convenience and deception. I felt the familiar itch of control slipping from my fingers, replaced by an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Every morning coffee shared, every bedtime story read, every casual dinner together. It all felt tainted now. I knew I couldn't confront her alone. I knew I couldn't process this without a plan, without leverage. That's when I began documenting everything meticulously. Screenshots of messages, printed photos from the surveillance, notes about every lie, every inconsistency. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the foundation I would need to confront her, to reclaim the truth, and ultimately to expose her for what she had done. And yet, beneath the anger, there was a quiet sadness. I remembered the early days of our marriage, the thrill of buying our first house on Elm Street, the laughter of our children as they played in the yard, the quiet Sunday mornings with pancakes and cartoons. That life, that seemingly perfect life, had been eroded by betrayal, layer by layer. But I refused to let the deceit stand. I refused to let Samantha's actions define the rest of my life. By the time Friday rolled around, I had enough evidence to confront her, not with accusations, but with facts, undeniable and inescapable. I arranged for our first face-to-face meeting since the discovery, making sure it was in the neutral territory of our kitchen, the heart of our home, where trust had once been sacred. The weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me, but underneath it all, there was a flicker of resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the truth, for my family, for the life that had been stolen without consent. As I waited for Samantha to return, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was reality, and I was ready to face it, no matter how painful, no matter how ugly. The house felt impossibly quiet again, and I realized that the calm before the storm was not a comfort. It was a warning. The confrontation, the revelation, and the unraveling of a 16-year marriage loomed like a dark cloud, but I had one thing that would see me through: the truth, backed by evidence, and the unshakable certainty that I would not be deceived any longer. The evening sun slanted through the blinds, casting long, thin shadows across the kitchen floor. I had been waiting for Samantha to come home, pacing back and forth like a man possessed. The evidence lay on the counter in front of me: printed photographs of Ethan holding the child, screenshots of text messages that made my blood boil, and even a flash drive containing the surveillance footage James had sent. I felt a mix of adrenaline, dread, and anger, an emotional cocktail that left me shaking, even as I rehearsed my words silently. When she finally walked through the door, I could tell from the way she paused mid-step that she sensed something was wrong. Samantha was wearing a fitted navy blouse, jeans that hugged her frame perfectly, and her hair was pinned back in a casual bun. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood, but I barely noticed. All I saw were the lies, the betrayal, and the hidden life she had constructed behind my back. "David," she said, her voice carrying that sing-song tone that had once been comforting, now grating. "What's going on? You've been tense all day." I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch, the weight of anticipation hanging like a guillotine over her head. Finally, I gestured toward the counter, toward the neatly arranged evidence. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but steady. "Now." Samantha's eyes flickered to the stack of photos, the flash drive, the printed messages. I could see the subtle shift, the brief panic, the flicker of guilt she tried desperately to mask. She laughed lightly, almost nervously, and moved toward me. "David, No," I interrupted sharply, holding up a hand. "Not yet. Sit." I pointed to the chair at the kitchen table, the one where we used to eat Sunday brunch together. She hesitated, then sat, crossing her legs tightly. The familiar smell of her perfume, a soft jasmine, did nothing to soften my fury. I placed the photos and messages between us, sliding them across the counter like a line in the sand. "I know everything," I said, forcing each word carefully. "The texts, the lunches, the evenings you've spent with him, the child." My voice cracked on the last word, though I tried to hide it. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes wide, a mixture of shock and fear. "It's not what you think," she started, her hands shaking as she reached for the stack of photos. I pulled them back slightly, making the physical barrier between us almost symbolic of the emotional chasm that had grown over the past months. "I don't think, Samantha. I know. And you can't lie your way out of this anymore." I leaned forward, my palms pressing down on the countertop. Every muscle in my body screamed, every fiber burning with a mix of betrayal and righteous anger. "Who is he? Who is the child's father?" Samantha swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. She looked away, then back at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "David, it's complicated. I never meant to—" "Don't," I snapped. "Don't. Spare me the excuses. Spare me the justifications. I trusted you. I raised our children, I built this life, and you built a lie inside of it." The words cut through the air like knives, and I saw her flinch. She opened her mouth again, hesitated, and then whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear, "His name is Ethan. And yes, he's the father." The room spun for a moment. I felt my chest tighten, my vision narrow, the world reduced to her words, the truth that I had been dreading. The anger bubbled, not the polite frustration of a minor disagreement, but a deep, searing, soul-consuming fire. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something, but I stayed seated, gripping the edge of the counter, forcing myself to remain in control. Control was all I had left. "Do you realize what this means?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "This child, this entire life you've kept from me. You wanted me to raise him as if he were mine? You wanted me to be complicit in this lie?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, the weight of guilt finally pressing down. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared, David. I didn't want to lose you. I thought I could handle it." "Handle it?" I echoed incredulously. "You call betraying me, hiding a child, keeping secrets for months, years, handling it? You call that love?" The tears streamed down her face, and I could see the raw vulnerability behind the facade she had maintained for so long. And yet, the vulnerability did nothing to soften the betrayal. My heart ached, not just for me, but for the innocence of the children, for the life we could have had, for the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. I stood, pacing the room, my hands raked through my hair, and I thought of all the mornings she had smiled at me as I left for work, all the nights we had shared in quiet companionship. And all of it had been a lie. The betrayal was complete. But beneath the rage, a cold determination began to take root. I would not let this slide. I would not allow deception to stand unchallenged. "Samantha, this ends tonight," I said, my voice hardening. "You're going to tell me everything, every lie, every secret, and then we figure out how to fix this, legally, if necessary." Her hands clutched the edge of the chair, white-knuckled. "David, please, "No, not yet," I said firmly. "This isn't about please. This is about facts. And the facts are clear. Ethan is the father. You hid this child from me. And now, we are going to deal with the consequences." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars passing by outside. The tension was palpable, the kind that made the air feel thick and difficult to breathe. I could see her trembling, but I didn't relent. The confrontation was necessary, it was unavoidable, and it was only the beginning. By the time she finally spoke again, admitting every detail, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The truth was out. The betrayal was fully revealed. And yet, in that revelation, I also felt the first glimmer of control returning. I had the truth. I had the evidence. And soon, I would have justice. The night stretched long, filled with sobs, confessions, and a careful, meticulous recounting of months of lies. I documented every word, every pause, every nuance. Each detail would matter. Each inconsistency would strengthen my position. By the time Samantha finally went to bed, her face pale and tear-streaked, I sat at the counter alone, surrounded by the evidence. And for the first time in days, I allowed myself a quiet, determined thought. Tomorrow, I would take the next step. I would bring this truth into the light, and I would make sure it could never be hidden again. The courtroom in downtown Dallas smelled of polished wood and anxiety, a scent that seemed to seep into every corner, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee from the courthouse cafe down the hall. I had never imagined that I would be standing here, in a suit that felt heavier than any armor I had ever worn, presenting my private life like evidence in a drama that had once been mine alone. Yet here I was, clutching a manila folder filled with the culmination of weeks of painstaking investigation. Photographs, text messages, surveillance footage, and, most damning of all, the DNA results confirming what I already knew in my heart. Samantha walked in a few minutes later, her steps careful, her expression composed yet brittle around the edges. She wore a tailored gray dress, her hair pulled back neatly, and her face made up with a precision that betrayed anxiety beneath the calm veneer. I could see her whisper something to her lawyer, but the words were lost to the hum of the courtroom. My children sat nearby, their small hands intertwined, faces pale with confusion and hurt. They were old enough to sense the storm around them, yet young enough to be shielded only partially from the truth. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and an impeccable bun, called the courtroom to order. "This case," she began, "will address the allegations of marital deception, child custody disputes, and financial misrepresentation. We will proceed with all parties present, and I expect decorum." I stood, my palms slightly sweaty, and gave a nod to the bailiff before stepping up to the front table. Samantha's gaze met mine briefly, flickering with something I couldn't yet name: fear, shame, maybe a hint of defiance. I felt the weight of every minute of betrayal press down on me as I opened my folder, arranging the evidence meticulously. "Your Honor," I began, my voice measured, calm, but carrying a steel edge, "I am here today because my wife, Samantha Parker, has deceived me for years. She has concealed from me a child that is not mine, maintained an ongoing affair with Ethan Cole, and attempted to manipulate the family and financial structures we have built together. I present to the court the evidence of her actions, verified through independent investigation and scientific confirmation." The courtroom murmured slightly, a low wave of curiosity and shock, as I laid out the photographs, text messages, and videos on the table. The prosecutor, though neutral, gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement, recognizing the meticulous nature of my presentation. Then I held up the last piece, the DNA results. The white envelope felt heavier than any weight I had ever borne. The words printed inside capable of dismantling a 16-year life in a single moment. "Your Honor," I continued, "these results conclusively prove that the child in question is not my biological offspring. This deception has been deliberate, continuous, and calculated." Samantha's lawyer tried to interject, arguing that the child was part of the household, that emotional bonds mattered, and that her intentions had been complex. But even as they spoke, I could see Samantha shrink slightly in her seat, her confident composure slipping as the magnitude of the exposure pressed down. Every photograph, every text, every frame of video had already painted the picture: a secret life lived boldly behind the walls of a trust I had once believed unbreakable. The judge's gavel hit once, twice, and then she called for the DNA verification to be read aloud. The technician from the lab, a precise and composed woman, stepped forward. "The DNA analysis conclusively shows," she said, "that the child in question does not share a biological connection with David Parker. The probability of non-paternity is effectively 100%. The words echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. I felt a wave of vindication, tempered by sorrow, ripple through me. Samantha's lips parted slightly, her face draining of color as the truth settled in, undeniable and public. I watched her for the first time in weeks without the haze of anger clouding my mind. Observing a woman confronted not just with evidence, but with the reality she had created. I felt the eyes of the courtroom on me, my children, the judge, the clerk, strangers in the gallery, and yet a curious serenity settled over me. This was no longer just about rage or betrayal. This was about clarity, about reclaiming the narrative that had been stolen. I spoke again, softer this time, but with firm resolve. I raised my children with honesty, integrity, and love. I have maintained the household, the finances, and the family structure while this deception persisted. Today, I seek recognition of the truth and the legal measures necessary to protect myself and my children from further harm. Samantha's reaction was subtle but telling. Her hands trembled, her eyes darted around the courtroom, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. For a fleeting moment, I saw regret flicker across her face, followed quickly by a defensive mask she had perfected over the years. Yet the DNA, the messages, the footage, these were truths she could not manipulate. The judge called for a recess before the testimony from Ethan Cole, and the room emptied slightly. My children clung to me, seeking comfort, and I held them tightly, whispering reassurances I barely felt. "We're okay," I said softly. "We're going to get through this. The truth is on our side." During the recess, whispers rippled through the hallway outside the courtroom. Neighbors, colleagues, and acquaintances had somehow gotten wind of the case, and their reactions were palpable, a mix of judgment, sympathy, and shock. It struck me how quickly the private becomes public, and how exposure in a court of law transforms not just lives, but reputations. Samantha noticed the attention too, her hand flying to her face, her breathing shallow. The facade she had maintained in our suburban world was crumbling, and there was nowhere to hide. When proceedings resumed, Ethan Cole's testimony only reinforced the narrative I had painstakingly built. His evasive answers, half-truths, and visible discomfort were transparent to anyone watching. The child's presence, the undeniable photographs, the concrete DNA results, everything converged into a story of deception that even the most empathetic observer could not ignore. By the end of the day, the judge had heard enough to set the stage for custody and financial hearings, and Samantha's lawyer looked visibly defeated. I felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow, a victory marred by the personal cost, a justice tempered by the wreckage of trust. Walking out of the courthouse that evening, the cool Dallas breeze on my face, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The public reveal had been devastating for Samantha, but it had been necessary. The truth had been brought to light, and for the first time in months, I felt a measure of control return to my life. I knew the road ahead would still be long. Legal proceedings, custody arrangements, and financial settlements awaited. But for now, I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life from the shadow of deceit. I had exposed the lies, faced the betrayal, and made the world see the truth. And in that clarity, there was a strange, almost bittersweet liberation. The courthouse steps glistened under the morning sun, the polished stone reflecting the harsh reality of the months that had just passed. I had never expected to feel relief on these steps, surrounded by the whispers of strangers and the indifferent hum of traffic. But today it was different. The judge's ruling was final. Samantha's attempts to pass off another man's child as mine were exposed fully in court, and custody and financial arrangements were determined fairly. The legal battle had ended, and with it, a chapter of deceit, betrayal, and unrelenting emotional turmoil. Walking out, my children clutched my hands tightly, their small bodies trembling slightly, not from fear this time, but from the intensity of the weeks they had lived through. I looked at their faces, the same faces that had looked up at me with trust and innocence, and I felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly than ever. They deserved stability, truth, and a father who would fight tirelessly for them, and I had done exactly that. Samantha was escorted separately by her attorney, her head bowed slightly, eyes avoiding both mine and those of the children. The woman I had once loved, the partner I had built a life with, was now a figure of regret and shame. And yet, despite everything, I felt a flicker of pity, not for the betrayal itself, but for the life she had lost in trying to maintain a lie. She had wanted to hide, manipulate, and deceive, and in the process, she had unraveled the very fabric of her own world. At home, the atmosphere was tentative at first. The house seemed both familiar and foreign, every corner echoing memories of dinners, laughter, and quiet moments that now carried a bittersweet weight. I began the process of reclaiming the space, not just physically, changing locks and securing finances, but emotionally, reclaiming the trust and authority that had been undermined for so long. Every drawer I opened, every document I sorted, every photograph I placed in its rightful frame, felt like stitching the pieces of my life back together. My children, surprisingly resilient, adapted quickly to the new normal. They asked questions, some gentle and innocent, others blunt and accusatory. Why did Mommy lie to us? Was the baby really not yours? Will she ever come back? I answered honestly, carefully choosing words that conveyed truth without unnecessary cruelty. Mommy made mistakes, I told them. We can't change what happened, but we can make sure our family stays strong and safe. That's what matters now. As the weeks passed, life settled into a rhythm. I returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose, no longer carrying the emotional weight of secrets and lies. I made sure to attend every school event, every little league game, and every bedtime story session, knowing that presence, honesty, and consistency were the truest forms of revenge against betrayal. Not vengeance, not retribution, but a steadfast commitment to living with integrity, proving through action that deception could not break the foundation of our family. Samantha's presence faded gradually from our lives. The court had allowed supervised visitation for a limited period, but I enforced boundaries strictly. Each encounter was brief, measured, and intentional, ensuring the children's emotional well-being remained the priority. She reached out occasionally, apologies carefully worded, but I realized that forgiveness did not mean reopening doors to past pain. Forgiveness was for me, not for her, to release the grip of bitterness and reclaim my peace. I spent many nights sitting in the quiet of our living room, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The betrayal had been profound, the emotional wounds deep, but the experience had taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, self-respect, and the importance of truth. I understood now that life was not about dwelling on the past or plotting revenge, but about creating stability, nurturing those who truly mattered, and protecting the sanctity of honesty above all. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, I stood on the porch, watching my children play in the yard, their laughter echoing across the neighborhood. I felt a sense of completion, not just in the legal sense, but emotionally. The storm had passed, the deceit had been exposed, and though scars remained, they were reminders of survival, strength, and the unwavering commitment to justice and integrity. In the end, the court could enforce laws, DNA could reveal truths, and consequences could be imposed. But real victory lay in reclaiming the life that had been tarnished by lies. I had faced betrayal, navigated the labyrinth of deception, and emerged with clarity, purpose, and peace. I had shown my children that truth mattered, that courage mattered, and that even in the darkest moments, integrity could light the path forward. As night fell, I sat with my children, reading stories aloud, feeling their warmth and trust seep into the very core of my being. The house, once heavy with secrets, now felt like a sanctuary. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe fully, to feel fully, and to believe that even after betrayal, life could be reclaimed, strengthened, and made whole again. The lies were gone, the truth was out, and peace, not revenge, had won.